Hello and welcome back. Thanks for coming to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. We've got a whole crew of helpers here in the kitchen today, and that's a good thing because our recipe this week is stuffed grape leaves. And all of the recipes I looked at for stuffed grape leaves called it a labor of love. So I'm happy to have my laborers here, and we're gonna have a lot of fun in the kitchen together making this classic Middle Eastern treat. So stuffed grape leaves is something that you can often find if you were to go to a Middle Eastern restaurant. They're usually in the appetizer section, but today we're going to make them as a main course. Stuffed grape leaves can have several different kinds of filling. One of the most common is spiced beef and rice, but since I'm vegetarian, we're picking a very common vegetarian option that is sort of similar to tabbouleh salad in these grape leaves. So I've got all of my veggies laid out here, and there's going to be a fair amount of work in chopping and food processing, then stuffing and rolling. So lots of fun to be had today as we make our recipe. We've done a fair amount of chopping and food processing, and now we're ready to assemble the mixture that's going to be the filling for our stuffed grape leaves. The main recipe I'm following today is from a blog called Feel Good Foodie. I did find lots of recipes for stuffed grape leaves and vegetarian stuffed grape leaves, and they're all quite similar, but like many things, it is the sort of recipe where each family puts their own little spin on it and makes the recipe their own. So I'll post the Feel Good Foodie recipe that I mostly followed, which I found of all the recipes I looked at had the best step-by-step description on how to make these grape leaves and the assembly process, which is really helpful for me. But I did use a couple others and take a few ideas here and there on a map. So here we have a cup and a half of short grain rice. Now you don't need to cook it first. It cooks in the process of cooking with the grape leaves. Okay, so I did rinse it. Then we have all of our veggies. So you can see that this would be a lot of chopping. I used just a small 3-cup food processor to do each of the ingredients mostly individually. So there's a quarter of a green bell pepper and some garlic. Tomatoes, I used about 3 Roma tomatoes, a whole bunch of parsley, some green onions, and a little bit of mint. So mint is one that I saw in several recipes but was not in the Feel Good Foodie recipe, and I decided, why not, let's add it. Okay, so Rosa, do you want to help me scoop all of these things into our big bowl?
Okay.
Yeah, scoop them. I don't know about you, but when I use a food processor, my instinct is try to be efficient and stuff as much in it as possible. But that isn't usually more efficient. I find that they grind things much more evenly if you put in less at a time. So I did each ingredient individually, and even with the parsley, I had to do it in 2 or 3 increments. Okay, now one recipe we looked at also called for chickpeas, half a cup of split dried chickpeas, and so I assume that would be like the rice that would cook in with it. I had a little bit of chickpeas that I had already cooked up, so they were ready to go. And I thought, well, why not throw those in for a little extra protein, a little staying power with this recipe. I love chickpeas, so in they go. What are you eating? The tomatoes. You're eating all the tomatoes. Are they yummy? Hard to complain about a kid who likes their veggies, right? So we're going to mix this all together. Do you want to mix? Then we're going to use a 1/4 cup of olive oil. This recipe uses more than that altogether, 3/4 of a cup, I read. This 1/4 cup that we're going to put in with our mixture actually is from last week. It's some of my garlic infused olive oil. I'm being true to my word and using it, so you're going to pour it in. And salt and pepper to taste. The recipe also called for some red chili flakes, 2 teaspoons of them. I would love to add red chili flakes to mine, but I'm out of red chili flakes at the moment. And I don't want things to be too spicy for the little people that may be eating them. Although maybe I'll add a little, a dash of cayenne pepper, because I think a little bit spread out over this much mixture should just add depth and not really a lot of spiciness. So, Rosa, do you want to grind the salt?
Okay.
Can you twist it? So it just said salt and pepper to taste. So we're going to add a little salt. We're going to add a little pepper. Now this part of this mixture, you can make a head. And you can keep this in your fridge and it'll actually do really well letting those flavors blend. So we're all mixed together here. Now I'm going to let that stand and then we're going to start working on processing our grape leaves. So grape leaves you buy in a jar. I went back to the Arabic grocery store to buy these ones. And so the next step is going to be to get those ready while our filling is chilling. Filling is chilling. And letting those flavors all blend. Our next step is preparing our grape leaves. So I drained the brine, the leaves came in, and they come in 2 bundles. And I was a little nervous pulling them out of the jar. I don't want to rip them. Okay, but they're in a bundle like this, and you're gonna put them in a bowl. So I've been boiling the kettle, and I'm just gonna pour this boiling water over them and let them sit for a few minutes. And then drain them in a colander, then stack them on the plate. So they're ready and nicely stacked on the plate to make it easy for the rolling step, which will definitely be the most tedious and labor-intensive part of the recipe. The recipe we're using calls to use the whole jar of grape leaves, both packets, about 60 to 70 leaves. Or more, depending. I think it's about 1 pound of grape leaves. That's the standard. I'm only going to do half of them today. I also read in several of the recipes that the filling works great as a filling for other vegetables that you might like stuffed peppers or stuffed zucchini. So maybe anything that I don't use in my grape leaves today, I'll try using in a different meal at another point in time. Now it's time to roll our grape leaves. And once we roll our grape leaves, we're going to place them in the pot we're going to cook them in. Now I've got a really small pot here because I'm just going to do a small number based on the time that I have. The full recipe would require a much bigger pot than this. You'd probably be looking at like your soup pot or stock pot that you have in your kitchen. The different recipes I read all recommended lining the bottom of the pot with a vegetable. Each recipe I saw suggested something different. One suggested potatoes, one suggested onions, and the main one that I've been using suggested tomato. Well, I don't know if you noticed earlier, but my little helper here was munching away on all my extra tomato. So I don't have any tomato left, but I do have in my kitchen some onion and some potatoes. So I'm gonna actually try a little bit of each. The authors of those blogs said the potatoes are really good for absorbing the flavors that are in the stuffed grape leaves. But then also I feel like the onions would add their own flavor that would be really yummy. So I couldn't decide which. So I'm going to do both. And this prevents your grape leaves from burning to the bottom of the pot. So it just provides a little bit of a barrier. And so what I've done is I've actually already practiced rolling a few of these grape leaves, and then we're gonna lay them in the bottom. So the suggestion is to try to cover as much of the pan at the bottom of the pan as you can. So if it's the right size to kind of go around in a circle, that's great. Or if you want to kind of do them like a Jenga tower, where you line them up this way, and then the next row you line them up perpendicular, that's a good option too. We have our grape leaves on the plate after we rinsed them. Now I have to tell you, I made a mistake. If you're doing the entire recipe and you're doing the whole jar of grape leaves, then maybe my mistake wouldn't be an issue for you. But I dumped out the brine. Silly me, trying to get them out. But now I want to store the rest in my fridge and I've dumped the brine out. So that was silly on my part. If you're only making part of the recipe, don't dump the brine. It'll store better. So I have my grape leaves. they have a little nubbin of leaf left on them. So it was recommended that you kind of take a small paring knife and just get that tough bit off. None of the recipes I looked at gave me the level of detail in wrapping these leaves that I would hope for. So I'm gonna try and be really detailed in telling you what I did, and hopefully it's right. I've never made it before, so we'll see. I'm laying the leaf vein side up. I figure that's like the wrong side of the leaf. And to make it the most aesthetically pleasing, you would want like the nice upper side of the leaf to be what's showing. So I'm gonna take a teaspoon. They said teaspoon, but I assume they mean this kind of teaspoon rather than like a measuring teaspoon. It's heaping, and place it in the middle of my leaf. Based on the directionality of the images, it looks like you have the bottom of the leaf facing you. And then they say roll it like you're rolling a wrap. Well, I've seen a few different techniques for that in my life too, but I'm gonna start in this case with the sides and then fold up the bottom and roll towards the top, towards the narrow point. Now you want to roll it tight enough that it's not gonna come apart while you cook, but at the same time there's uncooked rice in there and it's gonna expand as it's cooking. So you don't want to roll it so tight that your leaves explode and then don't hold together after the cooking. This is where it seems each of our recipes that I've chosen have this slightly tedious step that you can either choose to view as tedious or choose to view as meditative. And it's interesting, the author of the blog said that exact thing, that it's tedious, but that she waits until after her kids go to bed to do this part, to roll the leaves, and it is sort of like a meditative spiritual practice for her that she rolls them, and it takes her, she said, about an hour to roll them all for the whole recipe. So obviously we're not going to do that many tonight. You don't want to watch me roll an hour's worth of them. And then, of course, when you put them in the pot, you should put them kind of leaf closure side down, so that way the weight of the grape leaf holds it closed. During this meditative spiritual practice part of our recipe is traditionally where we talk a little bit about our story. The story this week is one that I feel most people are familiar with, even if you are not someone who is regularly practicing in the Christian tradition. The story of the Last Supper is kind of pervasive throughout popular culture. It gets referenced a lot. It's something people kind of know, but maybe not. So this is Jesus having his Last Supper with his disciples. And it's where he finds out that he will be betrayed. And it's where he introduces the idea of what has become the sacrament of communion. So that sacrament of communion is the reason why grapes were chosen as our food of the week, because obviously they are a key ingredient in wine, one of the two major elements of the Last Supper. When I looked up recipes for grapes, I just wrote grapes, I didn't write grape leaves, but this is what came back. So short of teaching you how to make wine, which I guess I was about to say I'm not an expert in, but I'm not an expert in this either. But wine is a little bit more time consuming over weeks. So that wasn't the right choice, and maybe not the most family friendly menu item. So grape leaves. All of the recipes came back grape leaves. It's interesting, when we think about the Last Supper, we obviously think about the bread and the wine, those elements that become part of communion. But I wonder if actually at that dinner they ate other things too. I imagine it was probably a more full dinner. Maybe not. Maybe the beauty is in the simplicity. But all right, I'm going to keep on rolling here. Keep on rolling. There's probably a song about that somewhere. And I'll meet you back here once I'm ready for the next step, because this is gonna take a while. I finished rolling my grape leaves. I rolled 2 layers in my pot, and you can see I used probably half of my filling. One recommendation that I forgot to mention as I was rolling and telling you about it was that after each layer, there's a recommendation to drizzle olive oil. The recipe called for 3/4 of a cup. We used 1/4 of the cup as sort of like a salad dressing in the actual filling, and then to drizzle each layer with the olive oil. So there was also the suggestion to salt and pepper each layer to taste. Then an important thing that you need to have is a plate or a lid of another pot that is smaller than the pot you're using. You want it to go inside the pot and sit right down on top of your grape leaves. So I'm gonna use this one upside down. So it goes right down in on top like this. This is to hold your grape leaves in place, because you're gonna add the water you need, of course, to cook the rice, but you don't want your grape leaves to float up to the top, because if they float up to the top, they'll come unraveled, right? So the plate or the lid of your pot, the next size down, is what you need there. So then you're gonna cover this in water, enough water that you're gonna cover all of the grape leaves and the plate itself. So then you might even need something heavy, like a bowl of water, or in a second plate to sit on top of this plate to hold that plate down so the plate doesn't end up floating up as well. I've added the water to my pot, enough to cover the grape leaves and the plate. The recipe calls for 5 to 6 cups, but since I'm doing less than the full recipe, I wasn't sure how much would be the right amount. Turns out it was about 4 cups. And then I found the lid for my pot, the next size down, and it fits nicely on top and hopefully is enough weight to hold the plate in place. So now I'm ready to start cooking. My stuffed grape leaves have been simmering for a half an hour, and most of the liquid is absorbed, which is what I wanted. So now it's time to add our lemon juice. Lemon juice is one of the key flavors in this dish. Since I only use 2/3 of the water, I'm only gonna use 2/3 of the lemon juice as well. So I've got half a cup here, and so I'm just gonna lift my lid off and pour it in. I'm just gonna pour it right in over top of my plate. Let that soak down through. And I'm gonna turn the heat down and simmer for another 45 minutes. The cooking is complete on our grape leaves. So now it's time for the big reveal. 2 hands, upside down, here we go. Okay. That went better than I initially thought it did, but it looks like we have a platter full of grape leaves. I'm gonna bring you over to show you. So this is what we've got. They're likely a little too hot still for me to taste test them right now. So I'm gonna have to wait a minute for them to cool, and then we'll really get to see what the flavor's like. Moment of truth time. Gonna taste test. Doing it live, so you get to see my authentic reaction. Those are yummy. The leaves really got tender, and I mean, because I was worried about that when I was wrapping. It's a little oilier than I think I would like, so maybe I was a little heavy-handed on the drizzle. But it's tasty, lemony and yummy. I maybe wasn't as heavy-handed on the salt as I could have been. That always said to taste. There was no measurement given. Yeah, that's yummy and fun. A lot of work, but I hope the rest of my family enjoys it too. All right, well, this is our second last installment. So I hope that you enjoyed this and that you join me next week for our final Guess Who's Coming to Dinner as we approach Easter. Bye.